The Union Pacific. No. 119 didn't just carry passengers. It carried secrets, sins, and the kind of goodbyes that tore a soul in half. In 1881, Wyoming, a ticket east cost $40, but for Sarah Miller, the price was everything she had left. She was seconds away from disappearing into the steam and smoke, fleeing a past that refused to stay buried. But destiny doesn't run on a train schedule. It stood on the platform, wearing a dusted Stetson and carrying a loaded peacemaker. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the true, gritty account of how a single desperation move by a rough-handed rancher named Charles Riker changed history on the Laramie Plains. The air at the Laramie Depot tasted of coal dust and impending winter. It was the 14th of October, 1881, a Tuesday that felt heavier than most. The massive iron wheels of the eastbound locomotive shrieked against the steel rails, a mechanical scream that drowned out the weeping of a woman 2 benches down. Sarah Miller adjusted the grip on her carpetbag. Her knuckles were white, the skin chapped from 3 months of scrubbing floors at the boarding house on 2nd Street. She checked her ticket again. Street Louis. It was a cowardly destination, she knew. But cowardice was safer than the alternative. The wind whipped her gray traveling dress around her legs, the fabric thin and patched near the hem. She looked older than her 24 years. The frontier had a way of stealing youth and replacing it with vigilance. "All aboard," the conductor bellowed, his voice cracking like a whip over the crowd. Sarah took a breath, holding it deep in her chest as if it were the last distinct air of the territory she would ever taste. She stepped toward the stairs of the 3rd car. A hand clamped around her upper arm. It wasn't a gentle, courting touch. It was the grip of a man used to holding on to things that were trying to buck him off. Sarah gasped, spinning on her heel, her free hand instinctively going to the hatpin she kept loosened in her bonnet. Charles Riker stood there. He looked like the land itself, hard, weathered, and unyielding. Dust coated the shoulders of his canvas coat, and his hat was pulled low, shadowing eyes that usually held the cold indifference of a mountain cat. But today, they were burning. He hadn't shaved in days. The dark stubble along his jaw twitched as he clenched his teeth. "You aren't getting on that train, Sarah," Char said. His voice was a low rumble, barely audible over the hissing steam of the engine. "Let go of me, Mr. Riker," Sarah hissed, trying to wrench her arm away. She glanced around nervously. The platform was crowded with prospectors, trappers, and families. "You have no right. I have a debt. And you have a problem," Char countered. He didn't loosen his grip. "I heard about the letter from Boston. I know they're looking for you." Sarah froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath the soot of the station. "You don't know anything." "I know enough." Char stepped closer, invading her space, creating a wall between her and the train. "I know that Sheriff Blackmore received a telegram this morning, an inquiry regarding a Sarah Jenkins regarding a missing ledger from the chaotic estate of one Arthur Jenkins." The name hit her like a physical blow. Sarah Jenkins was a ghost she thought she had buried 3 states away. "That has nothing to do with you." "It does if you're sitting in a jail cell in Laramie instead of on that train," Char said grimly. "Blackmore is at the saloon. He'll be here in 10 minutes for his rounds. If he sees you boarding, he'll put 2 and 2 together. You running looks like guilt, Sarah. And staying looks like what?" she snapped, tears of frustration pricking her eyes. "Suicide? I have no money, Char. The boarding house let me go. I have a ticket to Street Louis and $4. The train whistle blew, a deafening shriek that signaled the final call. The conductor began closing the gates further down the line. "Give me the ticket," Char demanded, holding out his other hand. "Are you mad? Give me the ticket. I'll refund it at the counter later. You come with me to the Double R. I need a housekeeper and someone to teach the boy. You need a place where the law doesn't think to look." Sarah stared at him. Charles Riker was a man of dark reputation. Rumors swirled around him like flies on a carcass that he'd killed a man in Abilene over a poker game, that his wife hadn't died of fever but of neglect. He was a hard man who ran a hard ranch. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help me?" Char looked over her shoulder at the approaching figure of a deputy walking the platform perimeter. He looked back at her, his eyes desperate. Because I can't raise that kid alone. Sarah. And because I don't believe you stole that money. The train lurched. The couplings clanged violently. The wheels began to turn. Sarah looked at the moving train, then at the deputy getting closer, and finally at Char's outstretched hand. It was a choice between a gamble and a guarantee of ruin. She shoved the ticket into his chest. If you make me regret this, Riker, I will burn your ranch to the ground. Char didn't smile. He just nodded, took her bag, and steered her toward the edge of the platform, away from the tracks and into the mud. I expect nothing less. The ride to the Riker ranch was 20 miles of bone-jarring silence. Char drove the buckboard wagon, the two roan horses kicking up clods of half-frozen mud. Sarah sat rigidly beside him, clutching her shawl. The landscape of the Wyoming Territory was vast and indifferent, a sea of sagebrush rolling out toward the snowy range mountains that loomed purple and white in the distance. They passed the rusted sign of the Holloway Land and Cattle Company. It was a massive stretch of barbed wire fencing that seemed to go on forever. Sarah noticed Char's jaw tighten as they passed the gate. Josiah Holloway is buying up everything south of the creek, Char muttered, breaking the silence. It was the first thing he'd said in 2 hours. Is he buying you out? Sarah asked, her voice steady despite her nerves. He's trying. He's squeezing the water rights, poisoning the market. He offered me 10 cents on the acre last week. Char spat over the side of the wagon. I told him to go to hell. And that's where you're taking me? Into a range war? Char glanced at her. You're safe at the Double R. Holloway is a snake, but he's a businessman. He won't cross the property line without a warrant or a deed. And as for the sheriff, Blackmore owes me a favor from the war. He won't come sniffing around my place unless he has solid proof you're there. You said you needed a teacher for the boy, Sarah said, shifting the subject. I didn't know you had a son. I don't. He's my nephew, Toby. Char's expression softened, just a fraction, but the hardness returned instantly. My brother. Passed on last winter. Pneumonia. His wife followed him in the spring. Toby is 10. He's wilder than a Mustang and hasn't opened a book in a year. Sarah looked at the man's profile. The lines around his eyes were deep. He wasn't just a rancher. He was a man drowning in responsibility, clutching at straws. She was the straw. I am not a servant, Char, she said firmly. I will cook, and I will clean, and I will teach the boy, but I expect a wage. If I am to hide out, I will not do it as a slave. Room, board, and $10 a month, Char offered. And protection. 15, Sarah countered. Char let out a short, dry huff that might have been a laugh. 12. And you have to pluck the chickens. Done. They turned off the main road onto a rutted track. The sign overhead hung by a single chain, Double R Ranch. The homestead was less impressive than Sarah had hoped. The main house was a single-story log structure with a leaning porch. The barn looked sturdy, but the corrals were in need of repair. A few head of cattle grazed in the near pasture, looking thin, but what caught Sarah's eye was the figure sitting on the porch rail. A small boy with a shock of blonde hair and dirty overalls was whittling a stick with a knife that looked far too sharp for his size. As the wagon pulled up, the boy didn't jump down to greet them. He just stared. Toby, Char called out, setting the brake. Come help with the horses. Who's she? The boy demanded, pointing the knife at Sarah. She's Miss Miller. She's going to make sure you don't grow up to be an illiterate fool like your uncle, Char said, climbing down. He reached up to help Sarah, his hands strong and warm through her gloves. Sarah stepped down into the dust of the yard. She looked at the boy, then at the dilapidated house, then at the vast, empty horizon. She felt a sudden pang of terror. She was miles from civilization, living with a man she barely knew, hiding from a crime she didn't commit, technically, under the name of a dead woman. Welcome home, Miss Miller, Char said, hauling her trunk from the back. The door to the house creaked open, and the smell of stale coffee and unwashed laundry drifted out. Sarah straightened her spine. She had survived the Boston tenements, She had survived the death of her husband, Arthur, and she had survived the long train ride west. She could survive Charles Riker. "Where is the broom?" she asked. Char pointed to the corner of the porch. Sarah picked it up, turned to the boy, and said, "Toby, put that knife away and carry this bag inside. If you cut the leather, you owe me a penny." The boy's mouth dropped open. He looked at his uncle. Char shrugged. "You heard her." For the first time since she left the East, Sarah felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't hope. Exactly. But it was the absence of fear. 2 weeks passed. The rhythm of the double R was a grinding, exhausting cadence that started before dawn and ended long after dark. Sarah's hands, once soft enough to do fine needlepoint, were now covered in blisters and small cuts. She learned that the real life of a ranch wasn't romantic sunsets. It was boiling water for laundry until the steam made the wallpaper peel. It was fighting the layer of grit that covered every surface in Wyoming. It was the smell of liniment and horse sweat. But there were moments. One evening, after a particularly brutal dinner where Toby had actually eaten his vegetables without throwing them at the dog, Sarah sat on the porch mending one of Char's work shirts. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and bruised purple. Char walked up from the barn, favoring his left leg. The limp was worse today. He had spent 12 hours mending the north fence where Holloway's men had accidentally cut the wire. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, taking off his hat and wiping his forehead with a rag. "Coffee's still hot," Sarah said without looking up. "You're a miracle worker, Sarah." Char groaned, sitting heavily on the step below her. "I don't think I've eaten a decent meal since '79. "Toby reads well," Sarah mentioned, biting a thread. "He's stubborn, but he's smart. He asked me today where Boston was." Char stiffened. "What did you tell him?" "I told him it was a place where buildings are made of brick and people don't wear guns to dinner." Char chuckled darkly. He leaned back, his head resting against the porch railing near her knee. The proximity was startling. In the vast emptiness of the ranch, their personal bubbles had begun to merge out of necessity. "Sarah," Char said softly, "about the letter. The money." Sarah froze. They hadn't spoken of it since the train station. "I didn't take it, Char." "I know," he said. He turned his head to look up at her. His eyes were blue, piercingly so against his tanned skin. "I did some checking. I wired a friend in St. Louis, a marshal named Bass Reeves." Sarah dropped the shirt. "You wired a U.S. Marshal? He's a good man, discreet. He told me that Arthur Jenkins didn't just die of a heart attack. He was cooking the books for a syndicate. When he died, the money was missing, and the syndicate blamed the widow." Sarah's hands trembled. "They said I took it. Arthur. He told me nothing. One day he came home with a satchel, told me to hide it in the floorboards. The next day he was dead. I was scared. I opened the satchel. It wasn't money, Char." Char sat up, turning fully toward her. "What was it?" "It was deeds. Land deeds, rail surveys, and a ledger with names." "Where is it?" "I burned the ledger," Sarah lied. The lie tasted like ash. She had to protect it. It was her only insurance. "I didn't want to be found with it." Char studied her face. He knew she was lying. He had played enough poker in Dodge City to know a bluff, but he didn't call it. "Holloway," Char said, connecting the invisible dots. "Josiah Holloway was in Boston 3 years ago, trying to secure investors for a railroad spur. You think?" "I think if Holloway finds out who you really are, he won't just try to arrest you. He'll kill you to get those papers." Suddenly, the sound of hoofbeats thundered from the darkness. Not one horse, many. Char was on his feet in a second, the exhaustion vanishing. He drew the Char, 45 from his hip with a speed that blurred. "Get inside. Get the boy. Get the Winchester." "Char, go!" he roared. Sarah scrambled inside, grabbing Toby by the collar of his nightshirt and shoving him under the heavy oak dining table. She grabbed the Winchester rifle from the mantel, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Outside, the riders pulled up. Dust swirled in the lantern light. "Evening, Riker." A voice boomed. It was smooth, cultured, and dripped with malice. Sarah peeked through the window curtains. A man on a massive white stallion sat at the front of 6 riders. He wore a fine suit, a bowler hat, and a diamond stickpin that caught the light. "Josiah P. Halloway." "You're trespassing, Halloway," Char said, standing his ground on the porch steps, his gun held low but ready. "Just being neighborly." Halloway smiled. "Heard you got a new housekeeper." "Pretty thing. From the east. She's none of your concern." "Oh, but I think she is." Halloway leaned forward over his saddle horn. "My associates in the banking industry sent me a flyer. Seems a woman matching her description is wanted for financial improprieties. I'd hate to think you're harboring a fugitive, Charles. That could cost you the deed to this ranch. Which, by the way, the bank is very eager to foreclose on. Get off my land." Char cocked the hammer of his gun. The click was loud in the silence. Halloway's men shifted, hands hovering near their holsters. It was 6 against 1. "We'll be back, Riker," Halloway said, his voice dropping to a menace. "And when we come back, we're bringing the sheriff. And maybe a fire." Halloway wheeled his horse around. "Enjoy the night. It looks flammable." As the riders galloped away into the dark, Sarah stepped out onto the porch, the rifle in her hands. She stood beside Char, watching the dust settle. Char didn't look at her. He was shaking, not from fear, but from rage. "He knows," Sarah whispered. "He suspects," Char corrected. He turned to her, and for the first time, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused, and trembling. "You didn't burn that ledger, did you?" Sarah looked into his eyes and shook her head. "No. I sewed it into the lining of my petticoat." Char squeezed her hand. "Good, because we're going to need it. This isn't about a ranch anymore, Sarah. It's about a war." The wind howled across the plains, carrying the scent of snow and gunpowder. Sarah Miller didn't pull her hand away. In the middle of the desolation, with enemies closing in, she realized she had finally found something worth fighting for. And looking at the cowboy who had stopped her from running, she realized she might have found something worth dying for, too. Winter in the Wyoming Territory didn't ask for permission. It kicked down the door. By mid-November, the snow drifted 3 feet deep against the north wall of the ranch house. The world had shrunk to the 4 walls of the cabin, the icy trek to the barn, and the howling white void beyond the fences. For Sarah, the isolation was suffocating, yet strangely liberating. There were no telegrams here, no policemen walking the beat, no judgmental whispers from high society matrons. There was only survival. The ledger lay open on the rough-hewn dining table, illuminated by the flickering light of a kerosene lamp. The wind rattled the window panes, a constant, mournful ghost seeking entry. "I don't understand these columns," Char muttered, leaning over Sarah's shoulder. He smelled of wood smoke and leather. His proximity made the hair on the back of Sarah's neck stand up, a reaction that had nothing to do with the cold. "It's a double-entry system," Sarah explained, her voice steady though her pulse hammered. She pointed a slender finger at a row of figures. "See here? Livestock acquisition. But look at the date. January. You don't buy cattle in January in Wyoming. Not in these numbers." Char squinted at the paper. His reading was rudimentary. He could read a wanted poster or a deed. But the dense, spiderweb handwriting of Arthur Jenkins was a different language. "So what is it?" "It's a code," Sarah whispered. Arthur wasn't buying cattle. He was buying votes. She turned the page. "Look at the recurring name, C. Vane. That has to be Senator Cornelius Vane. He's the head of the Committee on Territories in Washington." Char straightened up, pacing the small room. The floorboards creaked under his boots. "Vane pushes the railroad bills. Halloway wants the spur to run through this valley. If he gets the spur, the value of this land jumps from 10 cents to $10 an acre. And if he doesn't, then Halloway is bankrupt. He's leveraged everything on inside information that Vane would approve the route. That's why he needs the ledger, Sarah. It proves bribery. It proves collusion. Char stopped pacing and looked at her. The firelight danced in his eyes, softening the hard angles of his face. He looked tired. The winter was taking its toll on the herd. They had lost 3 calves to the frost last night. "You're sitting on a keg of dynamite," Char said softly. "We are sitting on it," Sarah corrected him. She stood up, smoothing her apron. "You could have turned me in, Char. You could have taken Holloway's offer." Char took a step closer. The air between them grew heavy, charged with the unsaid things that had been building for weeks. "I don't sell out my own. Is that what I am?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Your own?" Char reached out, his hand hesitating before cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed her skin, rough against soft. "You know you are." He leaned in. Sarah's breath hitched. She tilted her head up, her eyes fluttering shut. The kiss was imminent, a collision of 2 lonely souls on the edge of the world. Bang! The front door slammed open, caught by a gust of wind. They sprang apart, Char's hand instantly going to his gun belt hanging on the chair. Toby stomped in, covered in snow, dragging a bucket of firewood. Barn doors stuck again. The boy grumbled, oblivious to the tension he had just shattered. He looked at the 2 of them, blinking. "Why are you looking at me like that? Are we out of coffee?" Char cleared his throat, turning away to hide the flush rising on his neck. "Fix the fire, Toby. I'll go check the barn." He grabbed his coat and hat, shooting Sarah a look that was equal parts apology and promise, before disappearing into the storm. Sarah sank into the chair, her hand touching her cheek where his calluses had scraped. She was terrified of Holloway, terrified of the law, but most of all, she was terrified of how much she wanted that cowboy to come back through that door. December brought a break in the weather, a Chinook wind that melted the drifts into slush and turned the roads into rivers of freezing mud. It was a window of opportunity, and they were desperate. They were low on flour, coffee, and ammunition. "I'm going with you," Sarah stated, tying her bonnet tight. Char was tightening the cinch on the buckboard. "It's too dangerous, Sarah. Blackmore might be there. Someone might recognize you. I've dyed my hair with walnut shells. Char, I'm wearing your old duster. And besides, if Holloway makes a move, you need someone to watch your back. You can't drive the team and shoot at the same time." Char looked at her. She wasn't the fragile Boston socialite he had pulled off the platform anymore. She was wearing men's boots. A Winchester was scabbarded at her feet, and her eyes held a steeliness that matched his own. "Fine," Char relented. "But you stay in the wagon, hat down, chin down." The ride to Laramie was tense. The town, usually bustling, felt sinister under the gray sky. Mud coated the main street, sucking at the horses' hooves. They parked the wagon behind the feed store, away from the main thoroughfare. "Stay here," Char ordered. "I'll get the supplies. If anyone asks, you're my cousin from Cheyenne." Sarah watched him walk away, his stride long and purposeful. She scanned the street. A few cowboys loitered in front of the Bucket of Blood saloon. A woman in a red dress smoked a charit on a balcony. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Sarah's grip on the Winchester tightened. Something was wrong. She climbed down from the wagon, keeping to the shadows of the boardwalk. She moved toward the general store, peering through the dusty glass. Char was at the counter, negotiating with the proprietor, a balding man named Silas Webb. But Webb kept glancing toward the back room. His hands were shaking as he weighed the flour. Sarah saw the reflection in the store window before she saw the man. A figure emerging from the alleyway, moving to flank the front door. It was a man she recognized from the night at the ranch, one of Holloway's hired guns. A man with a scar running through his eyebrow. Boone. Sarah didn't think. She acted. She racked the lever of the Winchester, the mechanical clack-clack loud in the quiet street. She aimed not at the man, but at the whiskey barrel sitting on the porch next to him. Boom. The barrel exploded, showering Boone in rot-gut liquor and wood splinters. He shouted, diving for cover behind a water trough. Inside the store, Char spun around, drawing his peacemaker. He saw Webb reaching for a shotgun under the counter. Char slammed his fist into the man's jaw, knocking him cold, then vaulted over the counter. "Out the back!" Sarah screamed, running to the alley. Char burst through the rear door, bags of flour over one shoulder, his gun in the other hand. "Go! Go!" They scrambled back to the wagon. Char threw the supplies in the back and jumped into the driver's seat. Sarah leaped up beside him. "Hiya!" Char snapped the reins. The horses surged forward. Gunshots erupted from the street. Bullets whizzed past them, splintering the wood of the wagon box. A slug shattered the lantern hanging off the side. "Get down!" Char yelled, pushing Sarah's head into his lap as he whipped the horses. They careened around the corner, sliding sideways in the mud, narrowly missing a startled mule team. They thundered out of town, the shouts of men and the ringing of alarm bells fading behind them. They didn't slow down for 5 miles. When Char finally pulled the horses to a trot, they were near the jagged rock formations of Vedao Wu. He looked down at Sarah, who was slowly sitting up, brushing mud from her face. "You disobeyed me," Char said, his chest heaving. "I saved your life," Sarah shot back, adrenaline making her voice shrill. "Webb sold you out." "I know," Char grimaced. "Holloway has the whole town in his pocket. We can't go back, Sarah. We're on our own." He looked at her, really looked at her, and a grin broke through his anger. "Nice shot on the whiskey barrel." "I was aiming for his head," Sarah admitted. Char laughed, a genuine, loud sound that echoed off the rocks. "Remind me never to make you angry." The victory at Laramie was short-lived. Holloway knew they were desperate now. He knew they were isolated, and he was done playing games. 3 days before Christmas, the attack came. Not a direct assault on the house, but an ambush on the range. Char had ridden out to check the herd in the south pasture. Toby was with him, learning to rope. Sarah was at the house, baking bread with the last of the flour. The sound of gunfire rolled across the plains like thunder, but sharp and staccato. Sarah dropped the dough. She grabbed the binoculars Char kept by the window. Through the glass, she saw them. 2 riders chasing Char and Toby toward the canyon, Dead Man's Hollow. "No," she gasped. She ran to the barn, throwing a saddle on the mare. Bella. She didn't bother with stirrups. She just hauled herself up, shoved the Winchester into the scabbard, and kicked the horse into a gallop. The wind bit at her face, tearing tears from her eyes. She rode hard, pushing the horse to its limit. When she reached the lip of the canyon, she saw the disaster. Char's horse was down, thrashing in the snow. Char was pinned behind a fallen log, returning fire at 3 men positioned on the ridge above. Toby was huddled behind him, small and terrified. Char was hit. Sarah could see the dark stain spreading on his thigh. The attackers were moving down, closing the pincers. It was an execution. Sarah dismounted, tying Bella to a scrub oak. She moved to the edge of the cliff, looking down. She was above the attackers. They didn't know she was there. She settled the rifle against her shoulder. Breathe. Squeeze. Like a lemon. She lined up the sights on the man in the yellow duster. He was raising his rifle to finish Char. Sarah fired. The man jerked and fell backward, sliding down the shale slope. The other 2 spun around, firing wildly at the cliff edge. Sarah ducked as rock chips sprayed her face. She worked the lever, popped up, and fired again. She missed, but the bullet struck near their feet, sending them scrambling for cover. "Char!" she screamed. "Run!" Char saw the distraction. He grabbed Toby, hauling the boy up. Toby scrambled away. Char tried to follow, but his leg buckled. He fell, gritting his teeth against the agony. One of the attackers, realizing the sniper was a woman and likely alone, broke cover and charged toward Char. Char's gun was empty. He fumbled to reload, his fingers slick with blood and snow. The man raised his pistol. Sarah stood up fully on the cliff edge. She didn't have a shot. The angle was too steep. She did the only thing she could think of. She pushed a massive boulder, balanced precariously on the rim, with every ounce of strength she possessed. The rock groaned, tipped, and crashed down. It didn't hit the man, but it smashed into the slope just above him, triggering a localized landslide of snow and shale. The man looked up just in time to be swept off his feet and buried in a rush of white and gray. Silence fell over the canyon. The third man, seeing his odds vanish, mounted his horse and fled back toward the Holloway line. Sarah scrambled down the slope, sliding on her backside, tearing her dress, ignoring the bruises. She reached Char just as he was trying to tie a tourniquet around his leg. "Sarah," he rasped, his face gray. "You crazy woman. Shut up, Riker," she sobbed, falling to her knees beside him. She took the belt from his hands and pulled it tight. He groaned, his head falling back into the snow. "Toby," Char whispered. "I'm here, Uncle Char." The boy whimpered, crawling out from the creek bed. He was shaking, his eyes wide. "Get the wagon, Toby," Sarah commanded, her voice finding a sudden, terrifying calm. "Ride Bella back to the house, hitch the team, bring the blankets. Now." The boy ran. Sarah was left alone with Char in the silence of the hollow. The snow around his leg was bright red. "I'm not going to make it, Sarah," Char said, his voice thready. "You are going to make it," she said fiercely, ripping strips from her petticoat to pack the wound. "You don't get to die on me. Not after I saved your hide twice in 1 week." Char reached up, his cold hand touching her face. "The ledger. Give it to them. Save yourself." "No," Sarah said, leaning down, pressing her forehead against his. "We fight. We win. That's the deal." Char's eyes fluttered. "Sarah." "Yes, I love you." The words hung in the frozen air, heavier than the snow, warmer than the sun. Sarah froze. She looked at him, but his eyes had closed. He had passed out from the pain. "You hold on, Charles Riker," she whispered, kissing his cold forehead. "You hold on and you tell me that again when you're awake." The wind picked up, promising a storm. Sarah sat in the bloodied snow, holding the cowboy's head in her lap, waiting for the wagon, listening to the shallow rasp of his breathing, and praying to a God she hadn't spoken to in years. The romance was no longer a game or a convenience. It was a tragedy, waiting to happen, written in red on the white Wyoming plains. The kitchen table, usually the site of Toby's reluctant arithmetic lessons, had been scrubbed down with lye soap and covered in a clean sheet. On it lay Charles Riker, pale as the winter moon, his breathing shallow and ragged. Sarah Miller stood over him, her hands trembling until she clenched them into fists to stop the shaking. The house was hot. She had built the fire up to a roar to keep the chill of shock from taking him. "Toby," Sarah said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears, hollow, metallic. "Bring the whiskey. And the knife. The small one. The skinning knife?" Toby asked, his face streaked with tears and dirt. "Boil it first. 10 minutes. Do not take it out until I say." Sarah cut the pant leg away from Char's thigh. The wound was ugly, a jagged tear where the bullet had entered, missing the bone but burying itself deep in the muscle. It was bleeding sluggishly now, dark venous blood. If she didn't get the lead out, the infection would kill him in 3 days. If she cut the wrong artery, he would bleed out in 3 minutes. She looked at his face. He was unconscious, sweat beading on his forehead despite his cold skin. He looked younger like this, the lines of worry smoothed out by the void of sleep. "I love you," he had said. Sarah pushed the memory away. She couldn't afford sentiment now. She needed to be a butcher. Toby brought the whiskey bottle. Sarah uncorked it, pouring a generous amount over the wound. Char's body jerked reflexively, a low groan escaping his throat. But he didn't wake. She poured a cup for herself, drank it in one burning gulp, and then poured another cup to force down Char's throat if he woke up screaming. "Go to your room, Toby. Close the door. Put the pillow over your ears." "I want to help," the boy protested. "You have helped. You saved him. Now let me do this. Go." When the door clicked shut, Sarah retrieved the knife from the boiling pot with tongs. The blade steamed in the cool air. She took a deep breath, whispered a prayer to a God she hoped was listening, and began. The next hour was a blur of horror. Sarah dug for the bullet, her fingers slick with blood. Char woke once, thrashing and screaming a curse that would have made a sailor blush. Sarah had to throw her body weight across his chest to pin him down, soothing him with nonsense words. while her other hand worked the knife. Finally, with a sickening clink, the flattened piece of lead dropped into the metal basin. Sarah collapsed into the chair, the bloody knife clattering to the floor. She stitched the wound with a needle and thread soaked in alcohol, bandaged it tight, and then simply sat there, watching his chest rise and fall. She didn't sleep that night. She sat by the fire, the Winchester across her lap, watching the door and watching him. Every time the wind howled, she jumped. Around 3 a.m., Char stirred. His eyes opened, glassy with fever. "Sarah, I'm here." She was at his side instantly, pressing a cool, damp rag to his forehead. "Did we win?" he rasped. "We're alive," Sarah whispered. "So, yes, we won." He tried to shift, wincing as pain shot through his leg. He looked down at the bandages, then up at her. He saw the blood on her apron, the exhaustion in her eyes, and the rifle within reach. "You should have left me," he murmured. "You could have taken the train money and run." "I told you, Riker, I don't run anymore." She brushed the hair back from his forehead. "And besides, you said something. Before you passed out." Char's eyes held hers. The fever made them bright. He didn't shy away. "I remember." "Did you mean it?" "I don't say things I don't mean. Usually gets me in trouble." He reached for her hand, his grip weak but insistent. "I meant it, Sarah. If we get out of this, I want you to stay, not as a housekeeper, not as a teacher." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, hot and sudden. "Char, we are sieged by a cattle baron. I am wanted for embezzlement, and you can't walk. Let's focus on surviving the week. Marry me," he said. Sarah laughed, a wet, choked sound. "You are delirious. Maybe. But I'm right." He drifted back into sleep, holding her hand. Sarah sat in the darkness, the proposal hanging in the air like smoke. She looked at the man who had stopped her from boarding a train and realized that she had stopped boarding trains a long time ago. She had arrived. 3 days later, the fever broke. Char was weak, unable to stand without a crutch. Sarah had fashioned from a broom handle, but he was lucid. The mood in the cabin was tense. They were running low on food again. Toby had been spotting riders on the Ridge Scouts. Holloway was watching them, waiting for them to starve or freeze. He knew Char was hit. He was like a wolf, circling a wounded buffalo. On the morning of Christmas Eve, the dogs in the yard began to bark. Not the aggressive bark reserved for coyotes, but the warning bark of strangers approaching. Sarah grabbed the Winchester. Char struggled to his feet, grabbing his revolver from the table. "How many?" Char asked, leaning heavily on the table. Sarah peeked through the shutter slat. "2, riding slow, hands visible." "Holloway?" "No." Sarah frowned. "One of them is black, and he's wearing a badge." Char let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. He lowered the gun. "Open the door, Sarah. It's Bass." Sarah hesitated. "The marshal? The one you wired? Open it. If Bass Reeves wanted us dead, we'd be dead already." Sarah unbarred the door. The 2 riders trotted into the yard. The lead man was a legend in the territory. Bass Reeves sat tall in the saddle, a man of immense presence with a mustache that commanded respect and eyes that missed nothing. Beside him was a younger deputy, looking nervous. Reeves dismounted smoothly, tying his horse to the rail. He walked up the steps, the spurs jingling with a musical note. He looked at Sarah, tipped his wide-brimmed hat, and then looked past her to Char. "You look like hell, Riker," Reeves said, his voice a deep baritone that rumbled in his chest. "Good to see you too, Bass." Char grinned weakly. "Come in. Coffee's fresh, or what's left of it." Inside, the cabin felt small with the presence of the lawman. Reeves took a seat, accepting the tin cup Sarah offered. He studied her for a long moment. It wasn't a lecherous gaze, nor a judgmental one. It was the gaze of a man who solved puzzles for a living. "Mrs. Jenkins," Reeves said calmly. Sarah stiffened. "It's Miss Miller, for now." Reeves took a sip of coffee. "I got your wire, Char, and I did some digging in Street Louis. and Boston. He reached into his duster coat and pulled out a folded paper. This is a warrant for the arrest of Sarah Jenkins. Grand larceny. Fraud. Char's hand drifted toward his gun. She didn't do it, Bass. I know, Reeves said, raising a hand. Because I also found the body of the clerk who helped Arthur Jenkins cook the books. Man named Elias Thorne. He was found floating in the Charles River 2 days after Jenkins died. Before he died, he wrote a letter to his sister. A confession. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A confession? He admitted the syndicate forced them. He named names. But the letter wasn't enough to clear you, Sarah. It just proved there was a scheme. We need the numbers. We need the money trail. Reeves looked at Sarah. Char says you have a ledger. Sarah looked at Char. He nodded. She went to the bedroom and returned with her petticoat. She ripped the seam of the hem and pulled out the slim, leather-bound book. She placed it on the table in front of the marshal. Reeves opened it. He scanned the pages, his eyebrows lifting. Senator Vane, Judge Calloway, the Union Pacific Spur Survey. He whistled low. This isn't just theft, ma'am. This is treason. This brings down half the territory. And Holloway? Char asked. Reeves pointed to a column. Josiah Holloway. Payments for protection and land clearance. This ties him to the murder of 3 homesteaders in '79. Reeves closed the book and placed a heavy hand on it. This clears you, Sarah. With this evidence, the federal government will grant you immunity in exchange for testimony. You're a free woman. Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders, a weight she hadn't realized was crushing her until it was gone. She slumped against the counter, tears of relief tracking through the soot on her face. However, Reeves said, his tone darkening, getting this to the judge in Cheyenne is the problem. Why? Char asked. Because Holloway knows I'm here. My deputy saw his men signaling on the ridges. He's got 40 men surrounding this valley, Char. He knows if I leave with this book, he hangs. Reeves stood up, checking the load in his Winchester. He won't let us leave. He's going to attack. Tonight. Char looked at his injured leg, then at Sarah, then at Toby. We can't ride out. I can't ride. We don't ride, Reeves said, his eyes hard as flint. We fortify. We hold this house until the cavalry comes. What cavalry? Sarah asked. I sent a runner to Fort Sanders yesterday. Reeves smiled, a grim, dangerous smile. But in this snow, they're 2 days out. We have to hold the double R for 48 hours against a private army. Char managed to stand straight, ignoring the pain. He picked up his gun belt. Sarah, get the boy into the root cellar. Bass, take the east window. I've got the front. And me? Sarah asked, picking up her Winchester and a box of shells. Char looked at her. He saw the fire in her. He saw his wife. You take the back. Don't let them burn us out. The sun began to set on Christmas Eve. The wind died down, leaving a silence that was more terrifying than the storm. In the distance, the sound of 40 lever-action rifles cocking echoed off the canyon walls. The siege of the Double R had begun. The first shot didn't sound like a gunshot. It sounded like the crack of a whip against the log wall. Splinters sprayed inward near the stone fireplace, dusting the floor with pine. Douse the lamp, Bass Reeves roared, his voice cutting through the sudden chaos. Sarah blew out the flame, plunging the cabin into darkness save for the angry orange embers of the hearth and the pale moonlight slicing through the gun ports they had sawed into the shutters. Here they come, Char shouted from the front window, peering through the scope of his rifle. Shadows detached themselves from the tree line, dozens of them. Holloway wasn't playing games with scouts anymore. He was sending the wave. He was sending the end. Muzzle flashes sparked in the dark like angry fireflies swarming the valley. Bullets slammed into the thick timber of the cabin, a chaotic, deafening drumbeat of lead. The glass of the upper window panes shattered instantly, shards raining onto the floor like diamonds. Sarah crouched by the back door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She peeked through a chink in the wood, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. She saw 3 men running low toward the barn, carrying torches that trailed smoke in the cold air. They're going for the barn. The horses, she screamed, the realization turning her blood to ice. Let him hit the barn, Char yelled back, firing 2 rounds in quick succession. We can't cover it. If we open the door, we're dead. Bella is in there, Sarah cried. She didn't think. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last few months spiked into a fever. She wasn't just fighting for papers or names in a ledger anymore. She was fighting for the life she had built. That mare had carried her to safety when Char was shot. She wouldn't let it burn. Sarah, stay down, Char bellowed, turning from his post. But Sarah was already moving. She kicked open the heavy back door. The cold air rushed in, smelling of impending snow, sulfur, and fear. She raised her Winchester, took a breath that tasted of winter, and stepped onto the porch. Bang, bang. She dropped the first man with the torch. He fell face first into the snow, the flames sizzling out as it hit the wet ground. The second man spun, raising his pistol, searching for the target. Sarah worked the lever clack-clack and fired. The bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. A bullet whizzed past her ear, snapping a lock of hair and burying itself in the doorframe. She dove back inside, slamming the heavy oak bar into place just as a hail of gunfire chewed up the wood where she had just been standing. Are you trying to get killed? Char dragged himself across the floor, grabbing her ankle. His face was a mask of terror and fury, illuminated by a stray flash of gunpowder. I'm trying to save our stock, Sarah panted, reloading with trembling fingers, pressing her back against the logs. Forget the stock. If you die, none of this matters. Char's voice broke. In the darkness, amidst the gunfire, the raw honesty of it hit her harder than a bullet. Then don't let me die, she whispered fiercely. The siege raged for hours. It was a grinding, deafening endurance test. Base Reeves was a machine, moving from window to window, his shots calculated and deadly. He didn't waste ammunition. Every time his rifle cracked, a shadow out there stopped moving. He was calm, a rock in the river of violence. By midnight, the ammunition was running low. The floor was littered with hot brass casings. The air in the cabin was thick with acrid smoke that stung the eyes and burned the throat. They're regrouping, Reeves said, peering into the gloom. They'll rush us at dawn, overwhelm us with numbers. They know we can't hold out forever. Char checked his revolver. 2 bullets left. He looked at his rifle. Empty. He looked at Sarah's Winchester. Half a tube. We have to make a deal, Char said, his voice hoarse from smoke and shouting. Bass, you take Sarah and the boy. Go out the back while I draw their fire out front. No, Sarah said instantly, her voice sharp. We stay together. I am not leaving you. Sarah, please, Char pleaded, his eyes desperate. I can't walk. I'm dead weight. If they rush us, they'll kill everyone. If I surrender, maybe Holloway will let you go. Maybe he just wants the ledger. He won't, Reeves said grimly, reloading his last magazine. Holloway can't leave witnesses. Not now. We fight or we die. There is no deal. Suddenly, a strange sound cut through the lull in the shooting. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a scream. It was a bugle, clear, sharp, and brassy. The notes of charge echoed off the canyon walls, piercing the night. Bass Reeves broke into a wide grin, his teeth white in the gloom. Well, I'll be damned. The cavalry rides fast in winter. From the ridge behind Holloway's line, a thunder of hooves erupted. Not the chaotic scramble of outlaws, but the disciplined, rhythmic thunder of a U.S. cavalry troop. Shouts of confusion erupted from the attackers. The hunters became the hunted. Carbine fire crackled from the ridge, sweeping down on Holloway's men like the wrath of God. The darkness was suddenly filled with the blue coats of the Fort Sanders regiment. The army, Toby cheered, popping the hatch of the root cellar, his eyes wide as saucers. Uncle Char, it's the army. Char slumped against the wall, the tension leaving his body so fast he almost passed out. He looked at Sarah. She was covered in soot, her hair wild, holding a rifle like a frontier warrior, alive. "Merry Christmas, Sarah," he whispered. She crawled over to him, burying her face in his neck, sobbing with relief, the fight finally draining out of her. Outside, the sounds of battle faded into the orders of arrest and the surrender of Holloway's hired guns. The siege of the Double R was over. Spring 1882 brought a thaw to the Wyoming Territory. The Holloway trial was over, the cattle baron trading his silk suits for prison stripes. But the real reckoning waited on the Laramie train platform. The Union Pacific No. 119 hissed steam, ready to carry Sarah Miller back to the safety of Street Lewis. She stood with her carpet bag, the same one she had arrived with. Shar stood before her, leaning on a cane, his leg healing but stiff. He had shaved, yet his eyes held the weight of the winter they had survived. "Saint Louis," Shar said, avoiding her gaze. "Your aunt's expecting you. She has a job waiting at the library." Sarah nodded. "It's safe. Paved streets. No one shooting at me. You don't have to go, Sarah." Char stepped closer, the crowd fading into the background. "The ranch needs you. Toby needs a mother." He took a breath, removing his hat. "And I need you. I loved you when you were stitching me up on the kitchen table, and I love you now." The conductor bellowed, "All aboard." Sarah looked at the iron beast that offered an easy life. Then she looked at the cowboy who had given her a life worth fighting for. She turned to the conductor. "Sir, I won't be boarding. I'd like to refund this. We have a herd to rebuild." Shar's face broke into a grin that rivaled the sunrise. He dropped his cane, ignoring the pain to step toward her. Sarah dropped her bag. "I'm staying, Riker, but the price has gone up." "Oh?" Shar laughed, pulling her into his arms. "What's the price?" 50% partner in the Double R. My name on the deed. And you do the dishes on Sundays." "Deal," he whispered, pulling her into a kiss that drew cheers from the passengers. As the train pulled away, heading east without her, Sarah didn't even look back. She was finally home. And that, folks, is the legend of Sarah Miller and Charles Riker. They say love conquers all, but on the Wyoming frontier, it helps if you have a Winchester, a good aim, and a partner who won't back down. They married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony attended by Toby and Marshall Bass Reeves. The Double R Ranch stood for another 100 years, a testament to the fact that sometimes the wrong train is the right choice. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the Wild West. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more historical dramas like this. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a saga. And tell me in the comments, if you were Sarah, would you have gotten on the train or stayed for the cowboy? Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.